What's going on, everybody? This is Jerome Moore, host and creator of Deep Dish Conversations. And firstly, I want to say thank you for all love and support, and thank you for exploring the perspectives of social change with me on this platform. I want to encourage you all to like, subscribe, and follow us on YouTube and on your favorite podcast listen platform. And make sure you give us a 5-star rating if you're loving the Deep Dish Conversations. I appreciate all of the support again. I hope you all enjoy this episode.
This is deep dish, right?
Yeah, well, let's get deep.
So I'm going deep on both sides.
Welcome back to another episode of Deep Dish Conversations, Season 3. I'm your host and creator, Jerome Moore, and we have the executive director of Turk, Lisa, Sherman, Luna. Welcome. How you doing?
I'm great. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
No, I'm excited for you to be here. I'm excited about the pizza choice that you made.
Very delicious.
And thank you to the Venture Science Center for sponsoring this episode. We thank you, and thank you for 312 for the pizza. This is Lisa's first time having 312. She's already dug in. What you think about it?
It's amazing.
That's good.
Yeah.
Good.
I don't think I can go back to anything but deep dish now.
Look, well, hey, you put on 20 pounds and you be like, I think I need to go thin crust for about a year.
Oh, it's so good though.
But no, I'm excited to have you. I'm excited to have our conversation, and so I want to dig right in.
But you gotta eat with me.
Yeah, I'm gonna eat with you. I'm gonna eat with you. I'm gonna eat with you. Trust me, I'm eating. I'm eating. So tell us just how'd you get here to Nashville, right?
Yeah.
And a little bit of your background and family history. I know you're a native of Guatemala. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So, like every immigrant or child of immigrants, that's such a loaded question.
Yeah.
It's so complicated. But my dad is American,
Okay.
and he moved to Guatemala in his late 20s, and he met my mom there.
Okay.
And so we were raised in Guatemala with my mom's side of the family.
Okay.
I lived there until 2001, so I was 17 years old when my family had to move to the United States. So I had a lot of advantages. I spoke English, I have citizenship, but my family left Guatemala, which we always imagined would be our home where my parents would retire. And, I have 9 aunts and uncles in Guatemala, more than 20 cousins, and we're all very tight-knit.
Yeah.
And so we just always thought that would be our forever home. But in 2001, my youngest sister was kidnapped and rescued really violently on our way to school by 5 armed men.
Wow.
And so my parents just saw that as the last straw. My dad had been shot before. They've been held at gunpoint multiple times.
Wow.
People had broken into our home when my sisters were home alone.
Is that just common for the area, of your home in Guatemala, or was it because your father was American and it was the targeted?
No, sadly, it's very common. Crime and extortion, because people are so desperate.
Right.
Poverty is just so pervasive. And then in Guatemala, it's a country that experienced a really long, brutal civil war that ended in 1996. I remember when the peace treaty was signed.
Yeah, not long ago. Yeah.
Not long ago. And my parents lived in the middle of that. But sort of the post-conflict era and the total impunity of the Guatemalan military who massacred indigenous Guatemalans just led to a lot of corruption and impunity and crime. So yeah, sadly, it's the reality for most Guatemalans.
Right.
We just had the privilege of being able to leave when it got too hard.
Right.
Which is what motivates me to do this work, is just knowing the difficult choice that people make to leave home. It's not easy. It's not what my family wanted.
Right.
But ultimately, you want your kids to be safe, and you'll do anything you can to make sure that happens.
So 17 years old. What city did you all move to?
So we moved to Nashville.
You moved straight to Nashville.
Straight to
Guatemala?
Nashville, yeah.
So did your dad have roots here already, or
kind of? So my dad was a missionary, which is what led him to Guatemala. So our church is Otter Creek Church, and so that had been the sponsoring church that had employed my dad for 38 years. He just retired last week.
Oh, well, congratulations to him.
Yeah. So that was it. We don't have family here or anything. It was just
Right.
more those ties of having
Right.
that church community.
So what was that transition like? You know, like, yeah, you spoke English in the home probably, but in Guatemala is like all Spanish or maybe an indigenous like dialect of Spanish. You hear it, like, did you finish high school here?
Yeah.
And what was like
Oh, it was so hard, Jerome. It was so hard. It was my senior year of high school.
last
I
year?
went to a mostly white private school on
Okay.
scholarship. And the joke at the school was that between me and another girl who was half Honduran and half American, we made up the one minority at the school.
Wow.
And I hated it. I really hated it. I felt so out of place, so different. Everybody was welcoming and kind, but it was just such a culture shock, you know, of
Yeah.
having left my family, my culture, my friends, my high school, and then to be, you know, your senior year of high school, a completely new class.
Right.
Um,
It's like
yeah.
it didn't even count. Like it's like you there for 1 year and then like
Yeah, I even went back to Guatemala for my class's graduation to walk alongside them. They let me
Oh,
walk
wow.
and be there to be a part of it because, you know, it was a small school in Guatemala, so we had been together most of our lives.
Right.
So that to me was like my real graduation,
Yeah,
was
yeah.
going back home and doing that.
wow. So what were some of those like challenges? Because I've had the I won't say privilege, but I know the culture shock of like going to a country when I did Peace Corps, right? I went to Paraguay.
Oh, yeah. Oh, awesome.
And so, didn't know a lick of Spanish,
Yeah.
right? Novice level, but just you don't know anybody, everybody's welcoming, but it's still like, you're trying to figure it out, right? I was 24, right? And it was like, if you, and at least you had the language. I didn't even have that, right?
Yeah.
But it's still the people around you are just, you're unfamiliar, you didn't grow up with them, you don't really know new city, new town. And so what was like some of the like things that you really had to adjust to that was so different from Guatemala to here in Nashville?
Yeah. I think maybe the first was like being the brown kid or the brown person.
Right.
A lot of people assumed I was Mexican or would make jokes about like being Mexican. It was just really weird to stand out so
Right.
much. Because in Guatemala, I'm just Guatemalan, you know,
Right.
nothing
Right.
sets me apart. So I think that was that is kind of a real
Right.
culture shock, was just sort of that experience.
How did your parents help have that conversation with you at all, or what you might experience that may be different? And was it your mom first time in the States as well, or has she been?
She had been to the United States like visiting in the
Okay.
past. She had never really lived in the United States, and so it was really hard for her, especially being away from her family. She's very
Right.
close to her sisters and my abuelita who passed away. But that was really hard. I think she also experienced the like feeling like you don't fit in, and then just
Right.
our life experiences are so different from your average American,
Right.
right? The way of life, the things that we experienced or saw, and so it was just really hard to like relate to people,
Right.
especially being a teenager.
Right.
You know, the things that teenagers here were so concerned about were not things that mattered in Guatemala.
Right.
What car you drive, you know, the brand of clothes you wear,
Right.
like, you know, we worked with children who pick up trash in the garbage dump.
Right.
So it's just hard to like relate, and everything felt so trivial here,
Yeah.
you know, especially in the environment I was in, which was the more kind of white Green Hills, Brentwood environment.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't even know what that was like. 'Cause I grew up here, but he just didn't go, right? Because as you probably found out, everybody is kind of like diversity segregated in their own community bubble, and like you can literally grow up here and not go to Brentwood or Green Hills, because if you don't know anybody over there, like if you don't go to school over there, why would I need to commute all the way over there, right?
Yeah.
So you went to college. What college did you go to?
I went to Abilene Christian in Texas.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I was gonna ask you, so because I wasn't sure, did you think about ever going back to Guatemala for college?
I did not. I think it was always, the kidnapping was just very traumatic. I did get married in Guatemala.
Okay.
So did my sisters. But to imagine going back and living there permanently after what happened, it just, I don't think that I could ever be at peace,
Right, yeah.
Maybe now that so much time has passed,
Right.
but I think you kind of grow up in Guatemala with the sixth sense of like safety.
Right.
Always watching who's following you home.
Yeah. Those street smarts that you have.
Street smarts, yeah. You never roll your windows down
Right.
if you're stuck in traffic,
Right,
that kind of
which
thing.
are very different, like there than here, right? It's totally different. It's just, yeah, it's
Yeah.
totally like having experience living, like far as just Spanish speaking countries in Paraguay and Costa Rica is like one of the things that like knife crime, right? Is huge in Paraguay and Costa Rica too, because they can't to bear arms is different here, right? And so one of the things that like our security safety director was like, hey, if you ever get on the bus, they especially told this to our women that were Peace Corps volunteers, like if you ever get on the bus, try to sit on the outside and not the inside, because people can, if you sit on the inside, you can be trapped and a knife can be stuck to you.
Yeah.
I'm like I've never thought about that, like on riding the MCA here, like that could be a possibility. So it's just different, and so you have to have different awareness, which once you get it, it never leaves, right?
Yeah.
That's just like, it's a culture shock in itself to have to think about crime in a different way. So get to Texas. Did you find your community in Texas? What did you start to learn about America?
Yeah. So it's funny you ask, because I've always, until I found Turk, felt out of place. Like felt like America was not for me.
Really?
Yeah. I swore, after that senior year of high school, I swore I'd never live in Nashville. I'd
just go
never
to
live in
Texas,
the
yeah.
United States. Texas was more just like, I got a scholarship. I met my husband in high school, so he was going to ACU. But my goal in life since I came to the United States was always, I'm going to live abroad. I'm not going to live here. And so I fought that so hard. And I lived in London and Senegal, and we traveled everywhere. And my whole life, I'd always imagined like the rest of my life would be abroad.
Yeah.
Not Guatemala, just because of the history there, obviously visiting a lot with family, but I just imagined myself somewhere else, because I never felt like I found community here until I found Turk.
Wow. So London, Senegal. So were you studying? Were you like?
No.
or
So
you just-
I have a master's in armed conflict.
Okay.
So just sort of growing up in Guatemala in that context of the Civil War and post-conflict recovery and peace justice and things like that. I just always had an interest in working in other countries that were experiencing armed conflict or were recovering from armed conflict. So that was what my master's was in. And then I worked at Amnesty International, which is a human rights organization.
I always wanted to work there when I was in my international development thing. I was like, man, I was always applying, and
You and I are so much alike.
we are like more than you know. We are. Yeah.
Yeah, I had always dreamed of working at Amnesty since I was a kid. So I was so shocked and surprised when I got an internship, and then I was able to move my way up and became a researcher and worked in West Africa.
Yeah.
And I loved it. It was amazing work. But on the one side, my husband was like ready to come back. He's a Nashville boy, grew up here, same house since he was born.
Okay.
So he was anxious to get back. But then also I realized that I was occupying space that should be occupied by folks from those countries. So I lived in Senegal and was working on Liberia and Sierra Leone. And I wasn't investing in those countries the way that someone from those countries should be taking that role and doing that job. I started to feel a little bit icky of like, I'm just here for, a few years. Hopefully we'll do some good work. But the people who are from this country, who are going to raise their families here and live here, those are the people that should be doing this work.
What gave you that type of sense of thinking? Because that just doesn't happen, right? That's a journey. I know that's a journey to think hey, to put other people before you and understand the space that you're taking up. When did that consciousness and that thinking start to happen?
I think it happened even just during my master's program of a lot of the theory and talk around development or post-conflict recovery and the role of the international community in those countries. That was always sort of a topic. But when you're young and you're studying that, you think still about the kind of work you want to do and where you want to be. But I think for me, maybe it was being in Liberia and Sierra Leone and meeting the incredible activists that were doing the work, who, and just kind of what it was like to be an expat in those countries and realizing you're contributing to an economy that's not sustainable, when you're paying $300 a night to stay at a crummy hotel and you're inflating the economy.
Right.
And then there's already just incredible people here who know the culture, who know the language, who know the politics, which sometimes it's good to be separated from that. In fact, Amnesty for a long time had a policy that you couldn't be from the country that you were working in because they wanted sort of that neutrality, which I think can be important. But yeah, for me, it was just realizing I'm not going to live here long term. So it should be someone who's going to send their kids to school here, raise their kids here, whose future is impacted by the decisions that are being made.
What did you learn about your culture, right? Because in all those different places, they maybe never seen or met anybody that was from Guatemala, right? I know during my travels, nobody thought I was from America.
Yeah.
Nobody. You're Afro-Brazilian, you're from Cuba, anywhere else. Anywhere else but the United States of America, right? The continent of Africa, somewhere, one of those countries there, right? So what did you learn about your culture and what people thought about who you were, before, you got a chance to introduce yourself to them?
Yeah. Well, it's funny you say that because I get the same every time I travel is nobody assumes Guatemala. They always assume Mexico. I've even gotten Moroccan or Filipino, when you're sort of racially ambiguous, people don't really know. And of course, most people don't even know where Guatemala is, so they wouldn't even know to guess that. So I get that a lot of just people assuming anywhere in the world where there's brown people that might be from there.
Do you even get that? Did you even get that here in the States? What are you? Where are you from? how do you handle those questions? Or how did you handle those questions?
I know that question can be really controversial for a lot of reasons. One is for a lot of folks who've grown up here, obviously, that's insulting. For me, I've always loved that question because then I get to talk about Guatemala, which is my home and my identity. So that question doesn't bother me in the same way that it would bother someone who was raised here, who went to school their whole life here, who sees themselves as American. But I think because my identity is so tied up in being Guatemalan, that question, I love that question because then I get to say, well, actually, I'm from Guatemala and this is my home and it's so beautiful, and I get to talk about it. But I guess it all depends on the intention behind the question.
Yeah, which you never know. Well, you can feel it. I think you can sense it, people's energy and how they approach you on it. And that's why I tell people all the time, you're not sure, just ask people where do they call home? You can't go wrong with it. Where do you call home? Well, home is Guatemala, but I'm a citizen of the United States too, but I'm living in Senegal or wherever it may be. I know one of the things you had brought up is that sense of people that are living here could be doing the work. So one of the things I realized I had to self-reflect on and I was championing it for a long time, and then I had to really self-reflect. When I was living in these other countries, immersed in community, my mental health was better. Because then you had to deal with the racism and discrimination and just on the level that United States permeates it, right? And I was I don't have to worry about that. I can just go throughout my day and just do my work and stuff like that. And then when I was in China, I was like, man, I'm not. You when you know things are just happening in a country that you're living in, and you're like I should be okay with that, but it's like, well, like I don't really have to use my voice. It's not happening to me, right? So I had to really like do that self work. Like, wow, like I wonder if that's how other immigrants and refugees may feel when they come to the United States. And like, hey, this is the tax that I pay of living in another country, but I'm not having to deal with the problems that's going on or have been going on in my country. So I had to do that work and say, maybe I need to like remove myself from that and really like come back home and like I can use my voice and not really lean into that comfortability of, even though we all want, you know, that kind of less mental stress, but it's like I had to change that thought, and like I wasn't running away from anything, but it was like I had to recognize that, like, well, if I wouldn't be silent in the United States, I just can't just accept being silenced in another country when I know similar harm is being done to people that even may look like me or have like darker skin. So like that, I had to work on myself and really ask myself that question. It's not just being comfortable. It's like, well, you know, I'm American. It's my privilege. I can just go on about my business, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why I had to ask you, like, when did that hit you when you was living abroad in Senegal, and really understanding, like, maybe this is not the space, or I'm taking up space from people who can actually, you know, who's going to be raising the kids that live here, going through it, and I'm like, I got close proximity to it, but I know I can leave.
Yeah.
You know?
Exactly.
Yeah. And so, when did you come back to Nashville?
2015.
Oh, okay. Not too long
Yeah,
ago.
we were living in New York. I was working with an organization that lobbies the United Nations Security Council on behalf of children in armed conflict. And my husband and I were expecting a baby, and we just realized, like, he's a teacher, I'm a nonprofit worker, we can't raise a kid in New York City.
Nashville is just the New York of the South almost now.
I know. Now it's like insane how expensive it is here. But, you know, at the time we were living in a 1-bedroom and it just the idea of like raising a kid there. So I very reluctantly moved to Nashville at that time and thought, what in the world am I going to do in Nashville? I have this, you know, international degree. I've worked, you know, for Amnesty and all these places. Like, what work am I going to find?
Right.
And I was so lucky because then I found Turk.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. Like, you moved back, you found Turk, you found your community. Like, what was that experience? Like, how did you get introduced to Turk?
Yeah, I just started asking around, you know, friends or people that I knew to make introductions to me with, you know, other kind of nonprofits in town that might have, you know, a link to the international community, since that is where I always felt most at home. So I got connected to Turk that way and sort of started to have a conversation with folks from there, and then a position opened up and I applied, and the rest is kind of history.
Yeah,
I've been there for 7 years now.
You're the executive director now.
I'm executive
running the
director
show
now.
with an awesome team.
Yes, and that's the other thing. Never say never, because I always said I would never run a nonprofit, and now here I am. I'm learning my lesson.
Well, it's like when you and I had this, like, you know, when you live in all of these other countries around the world, like it's like a bug. Like it's different and it's exciting and you're exploring, and then like you come back home and it's like, or in your case, your second home, and it's like, you know, it's just not the same. I need to mix it up. But then you find like that niche that like you can use all your experiences and make like a city and a community better. So I'm glad like that you found Turk and Turk found you. Right? I love the work that Turk does. I really do. And even being from here, because I was in my, you know, North Nashville Black community bubble, I didn't realize like the immigrant and refugee population that existed here. But when I got back from the Peace Corps, because I realized, like, man, now I get it. Like, new Americans coming here, I need to be a part of whatever I can do, right? And so I did some adult literacy with new Americans for the National Public Library, went out to schools and did like computer literacy with adults from different countries that, you know, you need to fill out job applications, and language skills, ESL for Salvation Army. I was a startup director for Let's Play, language English through sports.
That's fun, yeah.
And So I was really like wanted to like embrace it because I now I kind of had that feeling. Oh, like I know now how like your language can just your language not knowing can kind of strip you of your character and your ability and
your identity.
Your
You can't
identity.
make jokes with people when you don't speak the same language.
Yeah, and then like employment, right? So these are things like that I might have knew about on the surface, but really didn't think about or like just like we're in the South, especially
Yeah.
in Nashville, where it's an English only, predominantly many years ago, it was really English first and English only type of city, and I just really didn't wrap my head around it like in my 20s, in my teens, in my 20s until I came back from Peace School and I really like dug into that community. So I came across Turk, and then I was like, oh, this is amazing what you all are doing. So for people who don't know, can you tell us a little bit about what Turk is and what it does?
Yeah. Well, so Turk, I'll tell you a little bit about Turk and Turk Votes. So Turk was founded in 2003 when a bunch of organizations that provided services to the immigrant and refugee came together in a successful campaign to get undocumented folks' driver's license.
Okay.
So a lot of people don't realize, but for a little while, Tennessee provided driver's license to undocumented folks, which is such a lifeline. You can drive to work and feel safe and
Right.
be able to show identification to law enforcement and not be afraid of
Right.
getting deported. And so they just realized the power and the need for having that kind of coalition. So Turk was born out of that. And it really is about having immigrants and refugees lead the work. And that those most directly impacted should be, guiding our campaigns, deciding the kind of work that we do. And it's really grown since then. Our vision and our mission is to ensure that we can create communities where everyone can belong, right? Where people of all nationalities, all immigration statuses, all races can belong and thrive and have opportunities that help them do that. But it's really about working with communities directly and helping them to grow into their leadership and the power that they already have, and ensuring that they're influencing policy. So really wanting to create a Tennessee, that recognizes that we're stronger when everyone can succeed and have those opportunities. So that's the kind of our charity side. We provide direct services as well to communities. But again, more from that transformational model rather than transactional, but seeing our services work as an opportunity to do community organizing and build power. So we provide English classes, legal services. We're doing a lot of COVID vaccine outreach right now. A lot of we have a network of domestic workers across the state, and we're organizing right now CPR training for them. But again, all of that is for the model of like, how are we building power for our communities? How are our communities sharing their stories and shaping decisions that are being made about them? But we also have a political arm, which is Turk Votes. So it's been around since 2018. And that is just recognizing that we needed a new political tool, that we needed to be able to influence elections and make sure that our people are accessing the polls, mobilizing to the polls, and that we're electing progressive leaders who are going to stand up for our communities and not just stand up for them, but actually create opportunities.
Right. And so I want to unpack this.
Yeah.
A lot. This is where the conversation gets deep, right? And really like put the focus on the Nashville immigrant and the refugee community. Now, as a Black American, a lot of times in our community, we see the amazing like togetherness that like when Latinx folks come to America, they start businesses, like they like practicing community economics, right, and thriving. And I think it's something that that Black folks like we want to do or model in a lot of ways, but for some reason I don't know if it's barriers, we can't get together, but like we know that our dollar doesn't circulate in our community like the Asian dollar or like the Hispanic dollar, right, the Latinx dollar, right. And so And it made me think like, okay, what, like, when folks come to the United States, we say, or just, to the United States, like, oh, it's diversity, it's a melting pot. But it seems like it's more of come here and then like find your community and stay within your community. So I want to ask, like, what does Turk do to empower that, find your community, but also connect with other communities that may not be Guatemalan or Honduran or Mexican, and try to like talk to white folks, black folks, or folks from other countries within your own kind of your Central American country or area or South American like continent or whatnot.
Yeah, so we do a lot of work around that. So recognizing, especially that being in Tennessee, the demographics just aren't there for us to have the kind of power that we need to really make transformation for our communities. The state legislature is what it is, and we're going to continue to build the infrastructure to ensure that we can break the supermajority and elect progressive leaders to the legislature, but that's going to take efforts by all of us.
Right.
The immigrant community itself can't transform the legislature on its own. So I mean, the first place is we are a multi-ethnic, multiracial, multi-generational coalition. So we don't just serve one community, but really trying to help the people that we work with recognize that the forces that try to divide us, that is very purposeful, right? That is about like keeping Black and brown communities down.
And coalition work is difficult.
Coalition work is difficult, but that's also why we work, with individuals and individual communities and just try and create campaigns or events or our organizing work that brings people together around a common problem, because at the end of the day, our communities face a lot of the same problems, right? Because it's white supremacy that is harming our communities, that is keeping us from, being able to succeed and thrive and have everything we need to be able to like raise happy, healthy, families. And so we hold those spaces. We do political education. We just finished a whole series on anti-Blackness in the immigrant community, and we talk to our members about what that's what it is and how it shows up, because it is very prevalent in immigrant communities. So that's one aspect of it, and I think what I love is some of the stories that have come out of that. So I think about one of our members, Hinda. She's a refugee from Somalia, and we met her a few years back when she was struggling to get her green card. It had been like years, and the process just wasn't moving, and she wasn't sure what to do. So our team helped her secure the green card. And she started to become involved in our work, showing up to our events, advocating for refugee resettlement, sharing her story, coming to the legislature. We eventually helped her become a U.S. citizen. And then when she was going to the polls in 2020, it was like a really long line that day. She was tired. She'd worked a full day, and she was like, I really want to leave. I don't want to be here. And then she texted our organizer, and she was like, but you know what? I'm going to stay, and I'm going to stay, and I'm going to vote for all those families who were separated at the border, And like for her to have like met undocumented families and have learned about their story and how similar their story was to her own story as a refugee. Because sometimes what happens is folks try to pit refugees against undocumented folks. They say, well, refugees have a legal status. They came here the right way. They are fleeing persecution or violence. Undocumented folks are just breaking the law. And so there's this narrative that tries to pit those communities against each other.
What's going on, everybody? This is Jerome Moore, creator and host of Deep Dish Conversations. And I know y'all enjoying this episode, but just real quickly, make sure y'all hit that subscribe button and hit that notification so you can be notified when we drop new episodes and interviews. All right? I appreciate all love and support. And let's get back to this episode. How do you like combat, for example, there might be immigrants or refugees that feel like, well, you all are making it worse for us, right? Yeah. Like, how do you combat that finger pointing when, like, we might even be from the same country, right? Yeah. But I feel like your behavior is making me and my family and the ones that are the good ones, right?
That happens a lot.
Yeah. So like,
Yeah, no, that happens a lot. And even thinking about like the wedges that people tried to drive between like Black American community and immigrant community. And so we try to meet people where they're at and try to
Right.
create opportunities for discussion and through our organizing work and like popular education tools
Right.
and thinking about ways that people can share their story with each other and then
Right.
they can realize like, oh, I'm a refugee. I came here, through legal means, but these families from Guatemala are fleeing the same thing I was fleeing,
Right.
right? And they just don't have an opportunity.
Right.
So it's just about like meeting people where they're at and creating
Right.
spaces. It's a process. It doesn't happen overnight.
So I had to really do self work once I left the country. My thoughts on immigration changed. I wouldn't say they changed for the better either.
Yeah.
And because it was due to my blackness, right? I would go to these places, specifically I would go to like Philippines, I would go to Costa Rica, Paraguay. I was in these places that like had black folks too, right? And like I would get just treated differently or realize that black folks in those countries were getting treated differently until they realized like I was American, right? And then I get that privilege. But it made me think like, wow, okay. Like this is how they really feel about me, about us. And then they come to the United States, right? But they act a different way. But this is like, so it made me like it really feel salty a little bit. And then but I put that behind me. And then when I came back and I was doing a lot of ESL stuff, and it was mostly Latinx community from Guatemala, Mexico, maybe Venezuela, but mostly women, right? It seemed like it's mostly women that's taking these like English learning classes, but like they would bring me food. We came really close, right? And then what was one class in particular? They was like Jerome, because you don't want to say the J, Jerome, right? And they asked me, they was like, why are Black Americans like so lazy, right? Why they like, right?
Yeah.
So they got comfortable enough for
Yeah.
them to feel like they can ask me. And I was like, okay, let's have this discussion, and really try to figure out like how much they knew about the Black American experience,
Yeah.
historically, the barriers and all these things. And I realized like, okay, you're not learning this
Yeah.
in your home country. You just come here and you're learning about the propaganda and the media.
Yeah, you're getting the same negative messages,
Right, you get the same negative
Yeah.
messages. And so then that's when I realized, like, after, I try to give them history lessons, say, hey, kind of one of the primary, if not the primary reason, like, you're able to leave there and come here is because of Black Americans and the fighting civil rights and all that stuff, which they didn't really know. And I'm trying to communicate this in, like, English and Spanish, so because it's the language again, right?
Yeah.
And so then I realized, like, oh, okay, you just don't know. And I can see now how you can be indoctrinated with this thinking and this white supremacist thought process because you just don't know and you just uneducated about it, and that's not your fault, right?
Yeah.
And, like I can't expect the Guatemalan, the Mexican, education system to teach you about like our history here in the United States, specifically Black history, because what would that kind of accomplish unless you study it going into higher education? And so that really changed, but it really changed a lot, but it still just gave me a different point of view of like, kind of filling out sometimes immigrant and refugee, especially if we had the same skin complexion on how did they see us as separate? Like, did they see me as I'm a Black American and I'm an Ethiopian, and our experiences and our cultures and what we go through are completely different? Or or was it something like, hey, look, my Black brother, my Black sister, like, hey, we in this together and like let's talk. And so that really gave me a different experience and made me have a different thought process about the immigrant and refugee community that we have here and just Blackness. So what is that conversation like? And I'm gonna put this out there. It's coming soon. So, but I'm probably gonna produce a series on anti-Blackness in the immigrant refugee community. Probably gonna be like a panel. So I might be calling you back, and it's gonna be a big production.
Yeah, no, that's
Don't
so
say that.
great.
But and so because I think it's something that I think a lot of organizations like Turk and like Workers' Dignity and some of these other organizations that intentionally work with immigrants or refugees or both, are starting to have that conversation, and trying to combat that and figure out how that conversation is. So how's that been in the Turk experience? And,
Well, first of all, anti-Blackness is global, right? So even if folks haven't learned about African American history in this country, like there are ways that anti-Blackness shows up in their own home countries. I didn't grow up learning much about the Garifuna, which is the Black Guatemalan population that lived along the coast, and there was a lot of anti-Blackness in Guatemalan, in just Guatemalan culture and life and politics, right? A lot of discrimination against indigenous populations as well. But you see it if you've watched the news lately on the Ukraine. You see it in the way that African students were kept from boarding the train to get out of the Ukraine. You see it in the way the media talks about the Ukraine, right? As if like these are civilized people who I can't believe this is happening, right? But what about all of the other conflicts and wars
and the conflicts as us as Americans
have
bring upon countries on the continent of Africa. And that's why I cringe sometimes. It's like...
or Guatemala. The United States assassinated our democratically elected president because he was giving the land back to the people.
If it wasn't Russia, maybe it wouldn't be, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like maybe because that is, but like that's why I cringe. Like we can't pick and choose.
Yeah.
We shouldn't pick and choose, but it's like, do we really want to have that talk? Because like it's okay if we condemn Russia, like then we have to look at ourselves, and then what benefits are we willing to give up, right, to not impede on other people's countries in their society, right? Because we benefit from it whether we know it or not, or whether we recognize it or not. The harm that our government, we benefit from it. It allows us to have the comfortabilities, the amenities that other countries are not able to have because of infrastructure and because of things just war torn and just unstableness, right? That is brought upon them by other world powers, right? And so it's finally, like people, if we're gonna talk about it, let's talk about it. And let's not just pick and choose.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
That could be a whole nother.
No, I mean it's so pervasive. It's a global disease and evil, and you even see it amongst refugees from parts of Africa, right? You see the sort of the internalized anti-Blackness, or the way they view African American communities, comparing their own communities. And so it's a real tool that is used by white supremacists to like keep communities down, to keep us from fighting for opportunities for all of us. So our movement, the Immigrant Rights Movement, has for a long time had an anti-Blackness problem, even in the way that when you talk about immigration reform, what's the first thing that comes to mind? It's brown people, right? But it's actually Black immigrants who are the most impacted by our immigration system, right? They experience more arrest, longer incarceration periods, more deportation, ill treatment. It's like, so really our movement as a whole has to center Black immigrants.
Right.
Because we're not going to change our immigration system. We're not going to have, the future that we envision for the Immigrant Rights Movement if we're not doing that.
Right.
So it's definitely a discussion that's happening constantly, and it's evolving. I mean, even in the way that it used to be okay to say we're a nation of immigrants,
right?
But now that's not okay to say, right? Because it erases the experience of
Black
Americans and Indigenous Americans,
right.
And so it's I think immigrants and the Immigrant Rights Movement has put themselves like to the proximity of whiteness because it's to their benefit, right? Yeah. And so luckily there are conversations happening and shifts being made, and there's a long way to go. Even for Turk, like we've started to be more intentional about unpacking anti-Blackness within the organization and within our movement, and there's so much more that I'm excited to do. Right. And I think it should be really at the core of any organization is how you combat that.
I would love, and when I was living in China, I was able to meet more people from all over the world than any place I've ever been. Because people, for some reason, everybody just coming to China. I could probably say I'd be so. I at least know at least one or two people that's living somewhere on every corner of the earth just because like of living in China for 2 years, right? And one of the things I was doing there, they kind of was like a catalyst to this. It was I was having these roundtable talks, film roundtable talks with Americans and like our different experiences being black and white living in China. Is it privilege to that? But then I started having conversations with brothers and sisters from the continent of Africa, right? And while we have maybe animosity towards each other as Black Americans, if I've never been to the continent of Africa, if you've never been to America, how can you not like me? And what reasons do you have to not like me, and vice versa, right? And we started unpacking that just in our personal conversations because I really wanted to know, right? And what it came from was just like propaganda or I heard somebody say this and therefore, or maybe just even one interaction with an American or an African that just gave you this negative perception about all of them, right? And so I would love for Turk or be a part of conversation with Turk if Turk brought in Black immigrants or refugees to talk with like Black Americans together and what that would like just be honest, like, hey, this is how I feel and this is what I think and why, but why though? Where is that coming from? If I've never been to Ethiopia, if I've never been to Guatemala, if I've never been to these places and I don't know you, but why do I feel this way about you? And I've never had a proper introduction to your culture, who you are, what you stand for, and your issues, your problem, right? And it's just, and I think a lot of it is a lot of self-hate.
Well, and hearing you talk, it just reminds me of what I saw in Liberia, right? Which is a country that was created or founded for former slaves. And
go back to,
But the people who are in power in Liberia are folks who have ties to America. And what do? They pass policies, they create systems that uphold white supremacy. And so indigenous Liberians are facing the same chains that folks that Black folks here in America face, and so we're perpetrating those same systems all over the world. And so it's just incredibly eye-opening to see like Black Americans in Liberia in power and the way that they upheld white supremacy against their own people, right?
And it might be, and I try to echo this a lot. Just because it has white supremacy, don't mean you can't be a person of color and not carry white supremacy mannerisms, right? Which is that self-hate. That white supremacy, perpetuating that same thing on people that look like you just because you have a different type of privilege. Like, it happens. And so it's an indoctrination. Like, it's literally a mental indoctrination that it can be imposed on anybody, right, if you wanted to, but you have to be intentional about stopping it and recognizing it. So I'm glad like Turk is having that conversation because I know just being an organizer and knowing like all the people in because we're small, really like community organizers is a small community, right? We all like we're 1 degree of separation. Like you from Guatemala? Do you know Jorge? Diaz? Salad? Jorge, he talks to me about Guatemala all the time and stuff like that. And so it's really good to just share and hear the information, but also be able to call Jorge and say, hey, Jorge, an undocumented, newly arrived Guatemalan just hit my car. Like, he doesn't have insurance. Like, and I don't want to get law enforcement involved, but however, I would love to get my deductible. And this is a real story, right? I would love to get my deductible, like, for State Farm so I can at least have anything else. And, like, he was able to mitigate that situation without, like, it took me knowing and understanding, right? And it took him knowing people and being able to, like, speak the language because the guy spoke an indigenous Guatemalan language, which threw me off. I'm like, well, that's not Spanish. Right? And he had just been there. He was working the, like, construction job with my cars parked. And it's like, well, look, man, I know how this goes. You don't have to be, I'm not one of them. And let me call Jorge. Let me figure it out. And then I was able to, get my deductible money. And so, like, I just think that doesn't do anything. But the more we know about each other's culture and struggles and how we're all affected by white supremacy, I just really think that doesn't do anything but make us stronger as a community and create, like, brave spaces just to have a conversation to really, like, get out any stereotypes, implicit biases we may have about one another, and then really unpack that. And I don't think we can do that more.
Yeah.
All right, we can do it and have those kitchen table talks.
Yeah, I mean, that's why we've been working in coalition with other groups like Equity Alliance or the unions, and we founded the Nashville Justice League in 2019 to be able to unite our different communities and really build progressive power, because at the end of the day, we're not going to win just by advocating for immigrants' rights or
Right.
civil rights, but it's really about like coming together and realizing that we all face a common enemy, and so we have to have those conversations and build power together.
And so I want to kind of talk about policy, right? That's your background. And policy, to me, like, that's the issue, right? A lot of times is, like, when we talk about white supremacy being carried out, a lot of it is in systemic policy that's, being currently created or historically just been around and it hasn't been changed. And, like, we have to change policy. So, like, Turk being, like, a statewide organization, what are some anti-immigration or refugee policies that are existing today that we need to be trying to combat and build around?
Yeah, I mean, well, there's so many,
Yeah,
unfortunately. Tennessee has been a hotbed for anti-immigrant, anti-Black policy, right? So at the moment at the state legislature, for example, we're fighting a bill that is aiming to keep undocumented kids from primary and secondary education, which is unconstitutional.
Right.
But Representative Bruce Griffey from Paris, Tennessee, his sole mission of being in the legislature is to make Tennessee the most unwelcoming place for undocumented immigrants. He uses much nastier words, but
Wow.
yeah, so can you imagine being from Paris, Tennessee, and the person that you elect to office to represent you, their whole focus is making life hard for undocumented immigrants instead of making life better for you by passing laws to increase access to healthcare, access to education.
So Lisa, like, who does that help? Who does that benefit? Like, keeping, kids, toddlers, right, from receiving education. Like, I don't like.
Yeah.
I don't understand that why that would be somebody's.
Because there's no common sense to it.
But like, so for people who are so against those who are undocumented, and I say this from a place of understanding, our country is a business, right? That's what is ultimately what our country is a business, and whatever quotas and taxes and everything, the money part that plays into, well, we can't have these undocumented folks here because of the business side. Right, but outside of like understanding our country as a business, like what is the harm? What is the harm of having undocumented folks here? Right, who is that harming? Who would they harm? What's the issue?
Well, obviously we would say there is no harm. And in fact, the solution is to pass immigration relief and create more pathways to citizenship. Because the reality is that our immigration system is purposely built to keep people out, to keep out Black and brown people. And so a lot of folks will say, well, why don't they just become citizens? Because they can't. Our immigration laws haven't been updated in over 3 decades. That is why we continue to fight for Congress to pass immigration relief. And it only benefits our country if folks can have access. Obviously, citizenship is not the be-all, end-all. We still know that there's racial injustice and there's a lot of work we need to do. But by allowing people to access citizenship, it really benefits everyone, right? You have, just from an economic perspective, you have, higher taxes, you have people in jobs, you have families that can stay together, that can create opportunities for their children. So it's really, the question should be like, why haven't we yet figured that out?
Yeah. What do you know, I guess, compared to other countries like Canada or even, Mexico or any other neighboring countries, like far as immigration policy, do we have one of the like strictest and compared to other countries immigration policy for people who are trying to enter the country and become citizens, or are we in the middle pack, or the degree of difficulty?
Yeah, it's really hard to compare because countries have different reasons for their immigration policy. So I think about like Sierra Leone, for example. There's a big Lebanese community in Sierra Leone, but Lebanese folks can't become citizens of Sierra Leone, right?
Right.
And so part of that is because Sierra Leone government wants to keep the country for Black Sierra Leoneans, right?
Right.
And not have Lebanese folks.
Is that wrong? Is
You know, I don't know.
Is that wrong?
Yeah. I would say in the context of America, like we know that we are stronger when everyone has access to opportunities. We
Right.
know that there's plenty of jobs, of, education, plenty of just opportunities for everyone,
Right.
right? And that we need to be able to create those, because like you said, what is the point of keeping children out of school? And in fact, the Supreme Court, when it said that undocumented children had right to a free public education, it was because they realized that it didn't benefit the country to create a subset of citizens or citizenry, right?
Right.
Of folks who were uneducated and didn't have that. Like they realized that no, we would all be better if everyone had equal access to education. Obviously,
Right.
there's lots of problems with our
Yeah.
education system, but yeah, that is at its core, why the Supreme Court upheld that.
I remember, like growing up here, it was like a big push. It was like just English first.
Yeah.
English, we only want English. Like, and I don't know. I don't even know if it's a fine line, but it's like people I think confuse like patriotism and like we're prideful to be American to kind of harm, right? And not really asking themselves like, what really would you be giving up as a patriot if you let, in this case, kids get an education,
Yeah.
or come into the country and have a better life and get away from war and crime,
Yeah.
or whatever it may be. But I think, Lisa, I'm pretty sure if you were born and raised in the United States, you may have had these thoughts before because it's pushed on you. They're like, hey, America should just be for Americans, even though how we would find it was rebellious,
Yeah.
and the way we came to the resources we have, wasn't friendly or legal or
Yeah.
like non-harmful in any way. But it's like it's been pushed now. It's like, American is proud. We should only have Americans. You're not from here. You're gonna take our jobs.
Yeah.
I still don't understand the taking our jobs movement. Like and
Yeah.
people still, like I'm saying, they're gonna steal our jobs. There's not enough jobs. And so I just really don't understand it sometimes.
Yeah.
Like I
I think
really
it's
don't.
like that fundamental question of who gets to be an American and who gets to decide that, right? The idea that there is one American identity is
Right.
just doesn't
Yeah.
exist.
Again,
like,
people don't
right?
think I'm American when
Yeah.
I step outside the United States. That's not unless I talk and they hear me. But or maybe clothing sometimes can give it away. But
Yeah.
I've never been mistaken for being American.
Yeah.
Never.
Yeah.
Not one time. Not a step. As soon as I leave this country, I'll use something else.
Yeah.
Because there's so much diversity of color in other places, right? And people, I think, generally just see America as like a white place, right? Just whiteness, right? Which
Yeah.
is, control and power and resources. Yeah, true. But then it's like that whole thing that we preach, I think, from a governmental level, like everybody's
Yeah.
welcome here, we're diverse, we're a melting pot, and all those things. But it's like, that doesn't seem to reach
Yeah.
very
Well,
far.
it reminds me of, I was at the legislature and one legislator who's a white older man asked me what my background was or what my ethnicity was, and I said I was Guatemalan American, and he said, "You mean you're American, right?" Like wanting to erase my Guatemalan identity, and it's just like, what does that even mean, right? I was born in Nashville, so
Right.
by definition, I am an American.
Right.
So why do you get to decide like
Right.
what my identity is or what that definition is, right?
This is just so unique to
Yeah.
hear too, like, and how we use color to identify each other and other people, and like we just can't be like we just can't just be with just a nationality, right? Like it's just like you go to China, everybody's Chinese, right? Here's like, no, I'm a white American, black American, or which is I think it's something. I think that says something about us to want to have pride in something else other than just being strictly American. Especially if you're just not white, right?
Yeah.
And so it's just we just different. It's just a different culture, and that's why sometimes it's just good to leave and just just I don't have to think of. I'll just take a break from it, and then let me kind of enter back into it, and like it's just every day. Every facet of our life is just embedded with it. Like everything, every culture is like literally has something attached to it. Whether you want to involve yourself in it or not, like it exists, right?
Yeah.
And and I know they're just so unique to like the immigrant and refugee population, because like those are just different stories, different experiences that that it's just unique, right? And like how can somebody who's never experienced that kind of like tell you at state's legislature like this is what you need, or like this is what will help you or not help you, right? It's
like English only, for example.
Right,
yeah.
right, yeah. Like how?
Yeah.
Like,
have those people ever tried to learn another
yeah,
language,
yeah,
right?
well,
Like,
look,
yeah.
like it's just like in that really, and maybe more Americans should leave, because that really showed me like you could be a doctor, an attorney, or have a high level position or expertise in a whole other country, but just because it's of the language, you kind of have to mitigate yourself to like I have to be a custodian at this particular time of my life, or I have to be in hospitality, not because I'm not capable. It's just literally I just don't have the words, or my schooling is not counted the same, so I would have to go back and try to go through medical school all over again. And who wants to do
and
that?
who wants to learn medical terminology in English in your 40s, right? Like that just sounds impossible.
My Spanish medical terminology is low, because like if you're not in that field, then if you like I don't what is Tylenol in Spanish? I don't know. Like
well, and again, and it's like thinking about the English only is like, why is the solution to take away interpretation and translation? Why is the solution not free English classes, right? Let's make sure that kids have all the resources they need in schools to learn English, have excellent ELL teachers who are paid well, right?
Don't create barriers.
Exactly.
Which we do, which our system does. Like they identify the problem and then create systems that create barriers to get the problem fixed. Yeah. Like that's what happens. I could talk to you all day, Lisa, about this. I really can.
Well, we need to have you over to our building. Have you been?
I have not.
Okay.
I have not, but I want to.
You would love our international night market, which will be in September.
Okay.
But it's our largest fundraiser. It started out as the International Food Crawl, but has evolved with the pandemic. But essentially, it is a worldwide tour of all of the best ethnic restaurants in Nashville. Okay. So it started off, you get on a bus and we take you to restaurants all down Murfreesboro Pike, Nolensville Pike, Charlotte Pike, and now because of our new building and the pandemic, we're actually hosting a night market. So our first one was last year, and we had 23 different countries represented in cuisine. Wow. And you get to come, be at our building, and taste great food, meet immigrant restaurant owners and other folks, and you would love it.
No, and I know I'm definitely gonna love it, and I'm definitely gonna. I live off of Nolensville Road now, so I'm always like, I never need. What does that smell? Where's that coming from? So.
We have an international dining guide as well online. If you want the names of all the restaurants, we can share that with you.
Oh, yeah. Definitely. Yeah. No, for sure. What are ways that people can support Turk, learn more if they're watching this and listening to this and say, hey, I have my thoughts about immigrants and refugees that may not be correct, but I just want to learn and be able to have a conversation and just learn more about their experiences, share my experiences and things like what can people reach out to you, or is there other team members at Turk? Or?
Yeah, well, the first way is through social media. So at TN Immigrant is our charity side, and at Turk Votes is our political arm. So follow both. We talk mostly about advocacy and policy and elections on our political arm side. So that's at Turk Votes, TIRRC. So that's the first way. We also have website. If you want to just learn more about immigration or you're trying to understand, we actually have a core part of our work is called Belonging Tennessee. And it's essentially like helping debunk myths around immigration and help people process demographic change. And so Emily leads that work, and she's been doing some really cutting edge narrative work around that's called deep canvassing, which is a tool that was used by the movement for marriage equality to win that fight. But it's essentially like teaching people how to have deep conversations around difficult issues in order to reduce bias. And so Emily has been leading that work and doing it, and then has been teaching a class called Transformative Conversations that helps people learn how to deep canvas in their personal lives.
Okay. No, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I see it here, narrative and engagement manager. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Lisa, I really appreciate you. You got to take this home
Yes,
with you.
I'm gonna take another
It's dinner.
piece. It's so good.
No, you
But y'all need some too.
They don't need none. But no, I really appreciate this conversation, and like we're gonna have to talk more. And
Yes.
I want to
hear
go to Guatemala.
all about China and Paraguay.
I want to go to Guatemala.
Yes.
I didn't get a chance to go.
It's
And
one of the most beautiful countries. I'm biased, but it is.
I've known people who've driven from Guatemala down to Costa Rica and stuff like that, but I didn't get a chance to do that, to Panama and all that. But I'm gonna make my way to Guatemala. I have good Guatemalan friends actually that I met just here randomly, and then they was here visiting, and they was like, I'm from Guatemala, and my uncle lives here, but I'm going back, and
That's
you become social
amazing.
media friends, and you just build a relationship.
Yeah.
Then they come back and you hang out. So I have to make my way down there.
Yeah.
But thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to the Venture Science Center for sponsoring this episode, and thank you all for watching and listening. And Lisa, thank you again. And
Thank you.
Till next time.
Yes,
All
till
right.
next time.